Video is recording. And audio is running. And here we go. 3, 2, 1.
Just drop that ass, bitch. It's open micers in the house. Pop that pussy with that open micers logo in your mouth. Jason with his bald ass head. Jacob looking in bed. It's open micers, bitch. Heard what I said. Drop that ass. Open micers in the house. Drop that ass, pop that pussy. Open micers in the house. Open micers in the house. Open micers is a mouse. Drop that ass, pop that pussy. Open micers in the house. The mic is now open.
That's right. The mic is now open. It's too early for that theme song. My name is Jason Robbins.
My name is Jacob Craig, and you guys are joining us on a very special episode of the OpenMicersPodcast. Technically a Patreon extra. We're going to go ahead and put it out in the regular feed for everybody, but we're recording at a very crisp noon on a Sunday. So yeah, a little too early for it to be daylight outside and listening to that theme song. We are joined by a guest today, though, on this Patreon Extra. We have a very prolific guest with us this morning. You know him from Conan, The Tonight Show, David Letterman. You know him from his fantastic half-hour Comedy Central special. He has a special on Amazon called Small, Dork, and Handsome, and he has a fantastic dry bar special. I can't recommend the dry bar special enough, called Live from the Universe. It is the one and only Myq Kaplan. How are you, my friend?
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and thanks for doing all the research, or at least making it seem as though you did, and pronouncing things right. The other day, a nice person who wanted to say a nice thing and did, and I appreciate the intent. I think that's not everything, but it's a lot of things. And he said, so my special is called Small, Dork, and Handsome, and a lot of times people are like, oh, I really liked your special, Tall, Dark, and Handsome. I was like, oh yeah, that's, thank you. I'm glad that you liked it. Or sometimes people say short dork. They're like, I know it's something that's not tall, and then my favorite one happened the other day. A guy said, hey, I really liked your special Small Dork Chocolate. And I was like, that is that'll be my next special. Sure, why not?
I mean, where did you get chocolate out of that whole thing? I don't get it.
Here's my speculation as to what happened is he knew that it was a play on Tall, Dark, and Handsome, and so it was a play on, he's like, dark, what comes after dark? Sometimes handsome, sometimes chocolate. He just, zigged when he oughta zagged. And I think, just to be clear to everyone, your listeners, I probably will not name a special Small Dork Chocolate, for it will not make sense for me or almost anyone, but I'm happy to have that be shared here. I guess what I'm saying is thank you for having me.
Yeah, I think if a Small Dork Chocolate would be severe misrepresentation if you were to call your special that.
The spelling of my name already does sometimes lead people to believe that I might be of a different culture than I am. So yeah, I don't need to throw any more obstacles in people's way to understanding me.
So you didn't change the spelling of your name. You were born with that spelling.
Oh, no. I've misrepresented myself as well. I did change it. I was given the most, at the time, I think for 50 years, the most popular name for boys, as it were. Michael, spelled the classic, if you've spelled Michael correctly, that's how it was spelled.
Hey, I feel your pain. Being a Jason, born in the 70s, Jason is the most popular name from like 1976 to 79. So literally my entire life, from kindergarten through college, I had at least 4 other Jasons in every class I was ever in.
Oh yeah, I had a summer camp where there were four of us in like a group of probably 13, four Michaels. So we all just chose a different name to be called by. One was Wheels, one was Spaghetti, one was Codfish, and I think I was Mouse. So they're like none of us. If one of us can't have it, none of us can
I
have
think I
the
found
actual
a new
Michael
nickname
Mikey.
for Jacob. I'm going to start calling you Spaghetti from now on, Jacob.
There you go. Just call me Pizza Roll.
And that'll work. Any Italian food. And the reason that I was about 14, 15, I could look up the exact year I decided to change the spelling of my name. I don't remember the year, but I remember the inspiration was Prince changing his name to a symbol, which seemed kind of out of nowhere at the time because it was based on like a legal thing that he couldn't talk about until it was over. But it just seemed like, oh, that guy's being weird and cool, and with language and names, so I'll do that. And then eventually, a couple years later, he changed back, and I was like, well, I guess I'm weird and alone. And so that's what I'm about, weird and alone.
So do you have anybody mispronounce the new spelling? Like, do they call you Meek or?
All the time. I mean, there's one time a guy was like, is it Meek? And then he was like, is it Mystique? I'm like, well, you just added a bunch of letters in that one, which I like the idea of. I've got having some mystique to it, though I guess I do a lot of talking, so I feel like my comedy is more about the opposite of mystique in many ways. Just straightforward, front and center. What you see is what you get. What you pronounce is what you don't get. Yeah, people say Mick, people say Myq, and it is something that I've brought upon myself, and I'm happy to bear the brunt of. Yeah.
What about you, Jacob? Couldn't you change the spelling of your name, like Jaqyb, something like that?
I probably could, but I feel y'all's pain because in the year 2000, the year that I was born, the most popular boy's name was Jacob.
Twilight did it.
Oh yeah. Oh,
I think
you're a Twilight baby.
I remember. I remember that Jacob is the name that overtook Michael. Michael was the number one for years, and then I think I used to tell a joke about. I used to tell a joke is a really elegant way of saying like I try. Here's the ingredients to a joke where I was like, if we want Michael to be on top again, like you got to go out and find all the baby Jacobs and destroy them, or send them off planet or change their names. Like that would be instead of going back and killing baby Hitler, why not raise him better? Just be like, hey, let's not have you be as many Jacobs as there were. Here's a thing that occurs to me. My girlfriend, so the weird and alone, that was a lot of my life for a while. Now I'm weird and together. With a wonderful woman. She's the best. I'm sorry for anyone out there who believes that they have a partner that they love the most and is the best. But if you haven't met Rini, my partner, then you don't realize that she is like objectively the best partner, the best person. So, I mean, probably try not to meet her because, just live in ignorance for the rest of your life. The way that sometimes there's a comedian named Joe Wong. I'll finish all these parentheses. Don't worry. Or I won't. But Joe Wong is a comedian I started out with in Boston. Super funny. And he used to have this joke about when he grew up in China, and when he moved to America, one day he was visited by Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'm not going to do the whole story, but he invited them in, and they told him about Jesus, and they were like, if you, now that you know about Jesus, you have to follow Jesus or you'll go to hell. And he's like, wait, but there's like 1 billion people in China who don't necessarily even know about this, this version of Jesus that you're talking about. Are they all going to hell? He's like, they're like, no, they don't know. So they're not going to. He's like, then why did you tell me? And so the point is, just don't meet my girlfriend. Because if you meet her, then you'll realize that you're in the hell of not being able to be in a monogamous romantic relationship with her, as I am, which is the most perfect experience that I've ever had. So this is all to say, Rini, her given name at birth, her parents named her Catherine, but her mom called her like Catharini, Rini Catharini. And so it was like a fun nickname that made her feel like loved and special as a child. But then she realized when we got together like 8 years ago, she was going by Catherine, and her mother was the only person who had ever really called her Rini. And then her mother, I believe, stopped doing that. And so she was telling me, she was like, it kind of feels like I kind of miss it. I'm like, it's sad that no one calls me Rini anymore. I really like being called Rini. And I was like, I think you could just tell people that your name is Rini or that your nickname is Rini, or you can be like, my name is Catherine, but you can call me Rini. And she's like, could I really? It was like a really interesting like experience, and it seemed weird at first for people who already knew her as Catherine. She's like, they're grandfathered in, they can call me Catherine, that's fine. But for now she introduces herself as Rini, and at first it was like she felt like she was getting away with something. She's like, she'd meet a new person and be like, hi, and they're like, what's your name? I'm like, I'm Rini. Like inside she's like, like, this is, I'm not, I mean, I could just, you can tell anyone that your name is anything. Like, what is a name? And so you could do it too, Jacob.
There's a power in that, being able to pick your own nickname instead of having one, thrust upon you.
100%. Like when I learned French was the language like I learned in high school. And the way that they don't say, what is your name? They say, how do you call yourself? And like, that comment t'appelles-tu, I believe, or comment allez-vous, I believe. It's been a little while, but that's just the phrasing of it. It's not about like, what is your name, the name that is like, inherently, permanently, intrinsically associated. It's like, how do you call yourself? Like, what do you refer to yourself as? And you could be like, oh, like, my name is this, but my friends call me this, or, I'm Michael to my grandparents and the government, but I'm Mike to this. I'm Mikey Caps to some of my good friends who like, I feel like that's the thing. If a friend, a lot of times nicknames do come from other people, but then I think it's like a symbiotic relationship where if somebody gives you a nickname that you don't like, you can be like, no, thank you. And if they keep saying it, then maybe they're not your friend. But if somebody gives you a nickname that you do like, then you can be like, hey, that's cool. I'm going to call myself that. And if people are like, hey, where'd you get that name? Be like, I got it from a nice friend. And now it's a team effort.
Yeah, because you don't want to get stuck with a bad nickname like, shit pickle or something like that.
You don't. In college, a buddy of mine, he would call me Myq Kaplan, pretty clever, I think, for a 7-year-old. And this was college. And I would always be like, I don't know. I don't feel like I know about that one. And I'm glad it didn't stick. But shit pickle, I don't know. I'm considering it.
I do have an interesting question to pose to both of you. This just hit me.
I'm excited.
You brought up an interesting point. What if, are names so important that what if Hitler had a different first name? Because Adolf is a pretty harsh name. Like, you expect genocide from a guy named Adolf, but what if his name was something like Jacob Hitler? Like,
don't put that on me, man. I don't need bad PR right now.
Do you think the world would be a different place if he had a name like I don't know, something easy, like Edward or something, like Edward Hitler?
Or even, how about even just Dolph? Like Dolph Lundgren, Dolph Hitler. Hey, man, he's like Dolph a surfer Lundgren now. But I will say, when you say you expect genocide from an Adolf, I think that might be because of this particular, like, we live in a world where that's the association that we have with that name because of that guy.
Forever. You can never use that name again, ever, till now, to the end of time.
Like the same way that I believe the swastika before the Nazis were around was from India, a symbol of peace. So like you might see swastikas in like, ancient Indian architecture, like in temples or some such, that weren't, foreshadowing the Third Reich. But things like that happen all the time. Like words and meanings and symbols change, and so that all I'm saying is get with the times, everyone. Let's all grow up.
Yeah, I think it's still illegal in Germany to this day to name your kid Adolf. I want to say that's a thing.
That is, I mean, it makes sense, and also, I forget what I listened to Alan Watts a lot, and I think it might have been in a talk by him where he was talking about laws and like what laws do, and how mostly for most things you don't have to tell people like what to do law-wise. Like, most people just generally, like, you don't have to make it, required to eat breakfast. Like, it's a law that you must, like most people are just going to eat breakfast, or like it doesn't have to be a law to eat food at all because you're going to eat food because that's a natural thing to do. It's only for things that, so that is, there's a lot more to this story. Go find all the Alan Watts talks. They're on the Waking Up app. And you ever do that? You ever start something and you're like, by the end of it, I'm sure I'll know what I'm talking about. And then
all the time for 200 episodes, I've done that, Mike. I've done that for 200 episodes of a podcast.
That makes sense. My point is, Alan Watts says good things.
Before we get off the subjects and names, I do want to throw this out there. When I was in school, there were so many Jacobs in the school that there were 3 Jacobs in my kindergarten class, and another one was named Jacob Craig. So we had the same first and last name, and we had to rock, paper, scissors to see who would be Jake and who would be Jacob. And I won the name Jacob Craig for the rest of the year. But come to find out that he was actually like my blood related like second cousin or whatever, like my dad's uncle that he doesn't talk to anymore had a kid who had that kid. So, and then he was in the same kindergarten class as me.
That is funny. I grew up on the same street as a guy named myq Kaplan as well. One time I got, we didn't really know each other, but one time I got an invite to a birthday party for a kid that I didn't know. Like, I opened up a letter. You're a kid, rare to get mail. I'm like, glitter came out of it. And it's like, you're invited to a birthday party. And I was like, that's exciting. And my mom's like, you don't know that person. We'd gotten the other myq Kaplan's invite because it was the same street. I'm okay now, but it took.
How crushing is that to your childhood psyche? Like, oh my God, I got mail. I got invited to a birthday party. And then it's like, no, it's not you. It's a mistake.
Yeah. If it was happening now, I would just go.
That's what I was going to say. Like, why not just go? Like, who cares?
That's the law. Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm at a party full of people I don't know. Love it. Here's a gift. Question for you, Jacob. Ever think about going by Cobb?
No, but corn. I have corn Craig.
Are you just improvising along with the question that I asked, or is that true? Are you lying to me, or are you telling me the truth?
I'm a bold-faced liar. I was trying to yes and you, Mike.
Oh, you did. No, that was great. Let's get back into it. Corn. Because here's the thing it'd be weird if you're like, I've never considered Cobb, but I have considered corn. And how did you get to corn? It reminds me, when I was a teenager, I had a friend named Susie, and she had a teddy bear that was like flat, like on purpose. Like, it was like, it was 3-dimensional because that's the world we live in, but it was like as flat as a stuffed bear could be. And now, have you heard of, there's a fancy kind of violin called a Stradivarius?
Yeah.
Well, she named her flat bear Flatabarius. And that's fun. But here's the thing. And I gotta check in with her now. But I asked her, I was like, oh, that's really fun. Did you name it, of course, because it rhymes with Stradivarius? And she's like, no, that is a coincidence. And I was like, I feel like that's impossible to name something that rhymes with Stradivarius by accident. It's
not like it's Johnson or something like that. It's like, that's a very unique name.
Yeah, and so that is the same feeling I had when I, just for a moment, I was like, wait, and I'm sorry to accuse you of lying when you were playing, when you were joking and having fun in the same spirit as I invited you to. I'm like, look, I have a serious question. Do you ever go by Cobb? No jokes, please. Only answer sincerely. Call yourself Cobb Craig. Yeah.
I have considered Colby, though, just because I didn't realize that the name Colby was a derivative of Jacob, like the biblical name. So I thought about Colby.
I'm learning that right now. This is podcast over. That's all I needed. I mean, we can keep talking. I'm happy to be here, but like I like I like learning things. That is cool. Here's one for you. Do you know the name Guinevere, like from King Arthur legends and such? Do you know what modern name is from the same etymological root as Guinevere?
Well, I'll incorrectly guess Gwen because I feel like that's where we're being led.
I mean, that's probably correct as well, but there's a cooler, better. What if I was like, oh yeah, it's Gwyn, just short for Guinevere? That would have been less exciting than what I'm about to tell you. Jason, do you want to make any guesses?
Gabriel.
Oh, another fine. It starts with G. Absolutely. I have led you down the wrong path. The answer is Jennifer.
Oh, okay.
It's all in there. G is kind of like a J. V is kind of like an F. R is the same.
So it was the GIF versus GIF people back in the day.
Wow.
They were just like Jennifer or Jennifer.
Jason, I really like that. And not just because, Gason, which I'm sure probably.
Gason! Yeah. Gason's your name now.
All right, this podcast is over. I'll see you guys later.
Jies. Let's try to scramble up all the G's and J's. Here's the thing.
I love giraffes. Giraffes are great. So.
Oh, yeah, the long-necked creatures? Yeah. Or on draft paper. I like to write down like my mathematical equations on giraffe paper. That would be fun to, do you guys know Nick Vatterott, the comedian? Oh God, I recommend everyone listening at home. You don't have to stop right now, but pause, write down the name Nick Vatterott, search for. He has got an amazing album called For Amusement Only, and he's got, I think it's a special called Disingenuous. And watch his late night sets. He's a friend of mine, and he's one of my favorite comedians. He is hilarious, and I believe this is not his I'm not going to say this is not his best joke in a way that, this is a fun joke that I like, but he does more than this. But he has a joke where he's like, I always confuse ramen numerals and Roman noodles. It's just a silly fun taste. And so I'd like to do that with giraffe paper and seeing graphs at the zoo.
That's funny, man.
And look, you can have fun with just the sounds that we make that mean nothing, that only attach to the concepts they represent arbitrarily, and that's not even scratching the surface. That's literally only the surface. But wait, there's more. Please continue this podcast.
Rest in peace to the man himself. I forgot his name. I blanked on his fucking Billy Mays, right?
Yeah, Billy Mays.
I blanked on his fucking name. Okay.
Oh, who's that?
That's the and wait, there's more guy.
Oh, I didn't. That's not Willie Mays, the baseball player.
No, it's Billy Mays here with OxyClean.
I didn't realize that there was one guy who was the initial source of. But wait, there's more. This is incredible.
That was his catchphrase. He did OxyClean. He did Flex Seal, and he died because as he got older, he would dye his mustache black. That was his signature, was a black mustache.
Oh no!
His mustache started going gray, so he would dye it. And because of the dye under his mustache constantly, it caused something for him to pass away.
The dye made him die? That is really on the nose, or under the nose where the mustache is, and very sad. And so it's the saddest irony that eventually, when he died, but wait, there's no more.
Well, I'm pretty sure the mountains of cocaine that he didn't help.
That's why he had to dye his mustache. So I guess.
Yeah, the mustache wasn't going gray from age; it was going gray from cocaine. Yeah. So, look, I don't mean to victim blame, and not to say that he brought it on himself, because look, we're all the sum total of the causes that came before us that we had no control over, our genetics or the environment that we were put upon. So, rest in peace as well, Billy May. It's really impressive when there's, I don't know who became famous first, whether it was Billy Mays or Willie Mays, but it's like, it's a lot to overcome. Like the fact that Michael B. Jordan is named Michael Jordan and is also as successful in a different field as, and in fact, I think the reason that he has to go by Michael B. Jordan is, I mean, maybe to separate himself, but in the union, because of, I believe, Space Jam, Michael Jordan had to join the union of actors. So officially in the union, Michael B. Jordan had to be a different name than just Michael. You could have been like, oh, Michael Jordan, the actor, Michael Jordan. We're not going to confuse these guys, but in the style of Johnny B. Good, Michael B. Jordan.
He could have combined his last name to make it easier. Instead of Michael B. Jordan, why didn't he name himself Michael Borden?
You're absolutely, or like a Scandinavian, Michael Bjorden.
Yeah, Bjorden.
there you go.
That's what you expect out of a black guy.
I mean, a Mike spells his name like this, and a Mike spells his name like that. Why not? I think we should be. I'm gonna try to do a podcast with that guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. I want him to get into shoes and just make B Jordans.
Wow.
I'm sure there's no case, no lawyer that'll take that case.
How about
I'll take it.
there's there's Air Jordans. What about Earth Jordans, Fire Jordans, and Water Jordans?
Earth Jordans are so bad they make you not be able to jump. You stay earthbound.
Oh yeah. We put them on birds. Yeah.
They're made out of
instead of like air cushion. Yeah, they've got
It's just rocks in the little just to make it to where you can't jump any higher.
Yeah. Oh my god! We'll have a new movie, a remake called Black Men Can't Jump. Finally, if they wear these,
that's
these
how the
Earth
white
Jordans.
Man. That's how the white man gets ahead, right there. Putting
and
rocks
sadly,
in the black guy's shoes.
That is metaphorically what has been happening lo these many centuries.
We've cracked it, guys. We cracked the code.
That was a good one
We've
there.
done it. Where do we go from there? So,
where we go from there, Jason, is that we're going to get into some open micers questions here. If you guys have been listening for a little while, you know that we like to get our guest stories from their start in comedy, some crazy stuff that's happened to them at open mics. So, Mike, when was the first time that you had done comedy? What part of the world were you in, and how old were you?
Sure. So there's a couple answers to this because it's a couple questions. But also, I was in college in Boston. I was going to Brandeis as an undergraduate, and then I went to Boston University for grad school. And the very first time I ever performed at a stand-up comedy at a comedy club was a place called the Comedy Studio, which is actually reopening in Boston now. They sort of moved during the pandemic and then didn't have a location for a while, but they're reopening. But for the past, more than 20 years, that was my comedy home, and so it was actually my first time on stage there was, I think, fall of 1999. But I consider my beginning in comedy to be around 2002, because when I first performed on that comedy stage, I was doing music. I had some funny songs, but I was mainly an aspiring singer-songwriter. Like, some of my songs were funny on purpose. Some of my songs were funny not on purpose. And I was just looking for anywhere in Boston that I could get on stage. I just turned 21. And so I could get into, bars and places that I couldn't get into before. And so I was mostly performing at music open mics around the Boston area. But I found this comedy club that I was like, can I do my songs at your place? And Rick Jenkins, the owner, was like, sure, you can have 5 minutes. And I was like, 5 minutes? That's not a lot for songs. But I went and I played like 2 real short songs and kind of talked in between. And didn't realize that stand-up comedy was a thing that people did who weren't famous. Like, I was like, I know Seinfeld did stand-up. I knew the people on SNL. I'd seen like a Dana Carvey special. Paul Reiser from Mad About You. He was the first special I ever saw when I was 13. But I didn't know there were not famous comedians. I only knew that there were famous comedians because those were the only ones that I knew. It was like this, tautological kind of, just a self-fulfilling ignorance. But I performed whenever they would let me at the Comedy Studio. And that was like maybe twice a year. So I don't consider that like my start in comedy until I realized that there were other open mics for comedy that I could go to, like all over the city, like, at least one or two most nights of the week, maybe excluding the weekends. And so it was like 2002, I performed at Dick Doherty's Beantown Comedy Vault for the first time.
That's
and
a
I
name
performed
right
at
there.
Oh yeah, Dick Doherty, rest in peace, died maybe a year or two ago, and he had at around age 70 or 80, somewhere in there. He was like an entertainer for like 60 years probably, and he opened up so many different Dick Doherty's comedy locations around New England. And he was like tons of them. I made dozens of dollars. And for a little while, he paid people in, how they have like Disney dollars that you can only use at Disney World? He had Dick Bucks that you could only use at his locations. He paid me in some money as well. And, when you're starting out, eventually when people are like, you're going to get exposure. That means that's exploitative. But in the beginning, you're like, you want to get on stage anywhere that you can, and like stage time. And so I got a lot of stage time from him, and I really appreciate it. And then there was another place called the Emerald Isle, which was in Dorchester, Massachusetts. So those were like my first three like comedy beginning location stories, I would say.
So what was the what was the scene like around that time in Boston?
I think it was really great. I think, like any, New York, where I live now, I feel like has the most comedy of anywhere in certainly the States, if not the world. Just like sheer volume of comedians and shows and venues. And then LA, of course, has a bunch. But then outside of New York and LA, I feel like any major city in the States is like a good place to start, if there's a comedy club or multiple comedy clubs. So there was like the Comedy Studio where I started, which was like kind of like the alty haven, the alt comedy, like Eugene Merman was like the big guy there when I was starting out. Eugene Merman and Brendan Small, who made Home Movies and Metalocalypse, among a bunch of other stuff. And then, the guy who made Bob's Burgers would be there because he was working, I think, Home Movies with Brendan. And so it was like a bunch of stuff, and like Conan's bookers would come there once a year and do an audition. And so it was like a really nice, it was right across the street from Harvard and near MIT. So there was like a lot of like, the vibe was come here, sit down like a student and listen, and then that's in Cambridge, and then across the river in Boston. And it's not, as like black and white a dichotomy, but it kind of was like there was, people coming to the Comedy Connection, were getting to like, Goodwill Hunting fights outside, and like, South Boston, and like, Boston has, it's a weird thing to say that Boston has diversity because it had like a lot of, segregated areas of different, classes and, cultures, throughout the city. Like, you could spend your whole life there and, see mostly people who were like you if you didn't leave your area. But, as a comedian, it was nice to have like areas like all over the city where you'd be like, oh, do my cute little jokes that work in Cambridge work in Boston at the Comedy Connection? No? Okay, well, then they have to be better or different. And like, I remember Brian Kiley, who lived in Boston for a long time and was a Conan writer for decades. And like an incredible joke writer. I remember him saying to me, he's like, if I have a joke that works at the studio and at the Connection, he's like, I know I have something special, something that works for, all like it could be just tourists who don't speak English plus, like they just got, bussed in from a hostel nearby, or, people who are so drunk that it's almost like they don't speak English right now and, trying to wrangle in addition to, at the Comedy Studio, it was like a comedy womb. It was just this like really beautiful, warm, welcoming, hospitable environment where you could try anything and people would be like, I'll listen to that. Whereas like there was a guy, Tony V, who was like one of the funniest people I've ever known. And he was one of the headliners who's been there since the 80s or maybe even before. And still one of the funniest like Boston, I feel like is really known for like putting out excellent like writers, like joke writers. In addition to, like I mean, it's so many people like Patrice O'Neill and Dane Cook and Jay Leno and that everybody's top three, and. But also, I feel like Gary Goldman, one of the greatest, writers and performers, one of my favorites. Wendy Liebman, I feel like, and tons of people that you may not have heard of, but incredible joke writers were coming out of Boston. Conan, of course, started out there as well. The Harvard Lampoon, and so there was. And I'd say that the Comedy Studio really fostered this writerly aspect of stand-up. And then the other place where you'd get, I wouldn't get into fights, but like it was, a more like it felt rougher and wilder and like a little more bananas, like the Comedy Club Bananas in New Jersey. And this is all to say, Tony V used to host every year this holiday. It was like the Christmas show, and everyone and he would do it. They would do it at the Comedy Studio one night, and they do it at the Comedy Connection another night. And we do it at the Comedy Studio, and that was the perfect environment for it because everyone was writing these sketches that were like kind of, sometimes like the most offensive out there. Like I remember I wrote a poem once for it called "How Hitler Saved Christmas," and in the style of, and it was kind of Dr. Seussy and like Grinch-like, but and then that we would do it at the Comedy Studio, and it was received in the way that it was intended. Like there was, like the way that like Sarah Silverman used to be a lot more like satire and irony, and you could know from. If you knew her heart, you know that she was not a racist person saying things that on paper, if a racist person said them, they'd fit right in. And I feel like she grew and evolved in a way away from that and became like more even, she's still super hilarious, but like there's like a more of a sincerity, I think, underlying the thing that she's doing now. But if you saw her and didn't know who she was, you might be like, who is this white lady saying these things? And so I feel like the holiday party at the Comedy Studio, the show, people got it. They were like, we know what is ironic, we know what is satirical. And then when they would do the exact same show at the Comedy Connection in Boston, like in the heart of Boston, I don't think that people did know or understand. And Tony V at the top of the show would have to tell the audience, he'd be like, there's gonna be sketches, and it's not what please don't heckle the sketches because they're not going to be able to, they're not going to be talking to, it's going to be like a little play. And even with that guidance, it was often, people were like, why is this happening? Like, it's a tradition. Anyway, so I feel like when I was starting out, there were these amazing headliners to look up to, like Tony V. And there was a guy named DJ Hazard who I thought was just it. He was the funniest. He was the first live comedian I saw, like other than as an adult. Like when I was a kid, my parents took me to see Henny Youngman once, and I remember nothing, But DJ Hazard was the first comedian who I ever saw. He came to my college, and I was like crying. I didn't know that. I was like, he's saying things that touched. Like I'm like, I thought things like that, but not like that, and it was just like. I don't even know how many people were in the room, but it was a really formative experience. So like I would go see him whenever I could. And just, there were so many shows happening. Like there were shows happening every night. There were open mics happening most nights. And it was a nice sort of like microcosm. There was like this sort of hierarchy of like, okay, well, you could learn from the older, more experienced comedians, be like, you start out, you try to get your 5 minutes together, or you try to get it on tape. You try to then get, once you've got 15 minutes, you get that tape. You send it to these guys who book shows, like in, the surrounding like areas of Massachusetts and Rhode Island. You go up to New Hampshire or Maine, and like you do an opening act, you get $50, and then you can work your way up to become a feature. Then you got 25, 30 minutes. You can do that. I remember the first 30-minute set I ever did was opening. It was just a 2-man show, me and this other guy. I'm trying to remember. Was it? Was it Ace Aceto? Anyway, he was a guy I opened for once, and he's a buddy now. But it was at this sports bar in Agawam, Massachusetts, and I had never done a half hour, and I was hired to do a half hour, and I needed to I wrote down on a piece of paper literally all the jokes I had ever written that could beat I had to do in order to make them be got to do my food jokes, then my dating jokes, then my movie jokes, then my TV jokes, and if I forget one, I'd be I meant to tell you this when I was talking about movies earlier. I know I'm on relationships now, but maybe I went on a date to the movies, and it was it was not my crowd, and I even if I didn't have a crowd. But it was a really great place to develop because there were all of these different kinds of opportunities for audiences, all these people who seemed like they were, had the wisdom of experience to be you should don't do open mics on the weekend because that's the time for paying comedy shows. And if people go to an open mic on the weekend at a place and it doesn't go well, then the place might never do comedy again. And, obviously there's no hard, fast rules that exist, universally throughout all comedy scenes for all time. But it really felt, in a situation where when you're starting out and you don't know how to do anything, and this was a time before there were tons of comedy podcasts where you could listen, maybe you could read interviews with Seinfeld, or listen to one CD that was called On Comedy and be oh, Seinfeld's advice is just work. Okay. Anything more specific? Stick to your time, move the mic stand out of the way. Okay. I got it. What else? And so it was great to be able to watch excellent comedians and see people Gary Goldman I think he had moved away by that point to New York, or LA, but he would come back a few times a year, and just to see him working things out, his open mic would be just, a showcase show here and there, or and he would sometimes pop around. You could just go to, there was maybe 3 to 5 shows happening any given night, and you could just bounce around to all of them and see. It was a really great class in starting out in comedy, and I think that's an answer to your question of what it was like.
And do you think? Well, go ahead, Jacob. I know you got a question.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, you've been doing comedy for over 20 years at this point. I'm sure that you've had a lot of crazy experiences at open mics or otherwise, coming up doing bar shows and smaller clubs and that kind of thing. I want to ask you, what is probably your most chaotic moment or night, in comedy, whether it be hecklers, fights, what have you?
Sure. What if I was no, everything's been completely sane and regular, and I make a plan and I stick to it.
We would call you a liar and end this interview right now.
That's fair. I feel the one that springs to mind there was this comedy, not a comedy venue. There was this restaurant bar called the All Asia Cafe. They had, I think, mostly bands, and I don't know if they're still around. I think they're not. But even if they are, I'm grateful that I had a lot of wonderful experiences there. And also, I remember one time I showed up, I booked the space for a time, and I showed up and some other band had also booked the space. And they were well, let's just see who has more audience show up, and that's who will get to do the show right now. And it was not me. But that was a thing that would happen once in a while. But so there was, I think it was called Stash's Comedy Jam, or Stash. This guy is Stash, or Stash, depending on who you are and how you pronounce his name. It's spelled Stash. He had this open mic, I think it was every Sunday at maybe 9 p.m. or something, or 8:30. And I feel this venue would just have shows booked every hour on the hour, every 2 hours. It would be just all day. You could have your band could book it at 3 p.m. or whatever. And they're yeah, if you get people in here, you can play on our stage. And so right before the open mic one night was a punk show, and the place was packed. It was it's not a big room, but certainly there was 100 people in a room that fits 80 people, and And it was just like, I don't know if it was technically a mosh pit, but it was like a chaotic environment to like show up at 8:15 for the 8:30 p.m. open mic, where usually there was not much going on before it, but it was just like, loud and chaos. And the punk show ended, but most of the punk audience didn't leave. And it's funny because I also, I'm like in my early mid 20s at the time. I'm a baby comedian and a baby adult human being, and I was like afraid of the chaos. Like I didn't think that they were gonna like murder me, but I was like uncomfortable in like a sea of people that really seemed like they were louder and aggressive than me and the people that I was accustomed to. Like, I'm like, they weren't just sitting in the corner alone writing in their notebook, my people. And so I remember the open mic just started. And I remember being on stage, and some of the comedians are like, "This is great. There's an audience here," but there's not an audience here for us. They're just people who just saw a show that they wanted to see and are just like talking for the most part and not listening. An open mic. And I remember during my set, I was vegetarian at the time. And since then, I've graduated to veganism. But I think I had a joke where I said I was either, I mentioned that I was vegetarian or vegan, and this gigantic dude who was there for the punk show, it seemed, he just like interrupted and he yelled, "I eat vegetarians." And that didn't make me feel good. And I wish I had, eventually, like later, I had, my George Costanza, driving on the way home moment. And I'm like, oh man, what if I had said, "Oh, then eat me"? That would have been I'm a vegetarian, you eat vegetarian, so you should eat me. And so this is a story about how I didn't know what to say in the moment, and then I thought of what I thought was the greatest thing to say after the moment, and then after that moment, I was like, that's not even that great to say. But it's just none of the and now it doesn't matter at all. Here, like a related experience, I did a show at a steakhouse once, and I think on my first album, it was like a joke that was like the most successful joke that I had written at a point in time. And here, if I may, here's like a brief story, like first an analogy. There's going to be a lot. I'm not going to get to it all, but good night, everybody. There's this story from, I don't know if it's from Buddhism or from, sort of Eastern spirituality, philosophy, where like a Chinese farmer has a horse and it runs away. And his neighbor's like, that's a bummer, man. Sorry your horse ran away. That sucks. And then the farmer is like, maybe yes, maybe no. And then the next day, the horse returns and it like brings another horse that isn't the farmer's horse, like a wild horse from the woods or wherever the horses are hanging out. And then his neighbor's like, wow, you got a new horse. That's amazing. That's worth a lot. That's incredible. And the farmer's like, maybe yes, maybe no. And then the next day, the farmer's son is trying to tame the new horse and gets thrown and breaks his leg. And then the neighbor's like, oh man, broken leg on your son? That really sucks. And then the farmer's like, maybe yes, maybe no. And then the next day, a bit busy time in this farmer's life. The next day, the army comes to town because there's a war that's breaking out, and they are there to draft every able-bodied man of a certain age. And they're like, well, your son just broke his leg, not able-bodied, doesn't have to get drafted into this war. His neighbor's like, great news. And the farmer's like, maybe yes, maybe no. So the story is about, we never know the full context if we're only zoomed in to one aspect of a situation. So this is all to say, a buddy of mine, when I started out doing comedy, was named Dan Hershon. Super funny. Still a dear friend to this day. And he and I both were in school, and we both auditioned for the Las Vegas Comedy Festival. And there were different categories. There was like club comedian, there was musical comedian, and there was another one, but then there was college comedian. And we both went in the college comedian category. And I think there was only like 4 of us that were going for that category to, you win a trip to Vegas and maybe some money and you get an opportunity. It seemed like a good opportunity. and we both wanted it, and Dan got it. And I was like, man, that sucks. And if the Chinese farmer had been there, he'd be like, maybe yes, maybe no. The
and
very
his
weekend
plane crashed on the way to Las Vegas.
Dan is okay, but that would be a way for it to go. That very weekend, I would have been in Vegas if I had won. I was performing at this steakhouse where I introduced the concept of vegetarianism by saying, like, I'm a vegetarian. Is anyone else here a vegetarian? And a guy in the back yells out, "This is a steakhouse," in like a cartoonish way that when I would repeat that story, it became like part of like a reliable joke in a time when I didn't have many reliable jokes. And it was a funny voice. People liked it. And so I was like, wow, if I had gone to Vegas, then I would never have done that show, and I wouldn't have written that joke, and it wouldn't have been a part of my very first comedy hour, my first album. And then several years later, I'm like, yeah, who cares about that joke? Anyway, like, man, if I hadn't written that joke, then I would have just written a lot of other jokes. Which was a valuable lesson to learn, that, you write a joke, you find out somebody else has a similar joke. In the beginning, that's crushing. You're like, but that joke, it was my joke. It was my one best joke. And then, hopefully, eventually you'll write.
That joke ruined me being a spokesperson for the USDA.
Exactly. You get it. Anyway, this is all to say, at that time, when that guy yelled, "I eat vegetarians," it it scared me. It threw me off. It, made me uncomfortable. I was like, it felt big at the time because it was the big, scary thing for every person who's not a comedian. I mean, maybe not literally every person, but certainly almost every person that I've ever talked to, when they find out you're a comedian, they're like, how do you deal with hecklers? How do you and truly, I mean, you deal with them by them happening, and in that moment, you deal with them by being afraid and saying goodnight, everybody. There's a lot of ways to deal with a heckler. You can not say anything. You can say something. You can, but ultimately you learn, hecklers aren't a part of this complete breakfast for every comedian. It's like, who eats cereal with a grapefruit and also this gigantic mountain of hash browns and a full pitcher of orange juice?
It's only part of a balanced breakfast.
And hardly, sometimes you're just eating one piece of toast and running out the door, and that's probably more common than the heckler ingredient of stand-up comedy. And so, yeah, now at that time, it's such an interesting thing. Like, any story that I have now that I'm like, oh man, there's other shapes of stories where I was like, that was the worst. And I talk about some of them on stage, in a way that I just remember being at Nick's Comedy Stop as well, and being just I only remember the emotion, as Maya Angelou said, we won't remember what people did or what they said, only how you made them feel. And so I don't remember what any of these people said, but I remember just kind of being shaking on stage. I'm like, these are people who are drunk, and what if they say something, and sometimes they do, and you're like, oh no, you're bad. I'm not bad. You're bad, and whatever it is. But yeah, I guess those are some of the specific experiences I remember, which thankfully, if you keep doing comedy, they sort of recede into the background, or they become harmless, or you can alchemize them into funny stories that then you tell other audiences. I saw this guy, I forget his name, Schiff. I think his last name is Schiff, and I forget his first name. He wrote the book I Killed, which is collaborated with a bunch of comedians, and it's a bunch of stories about road horror stories, and I Killed is sort of an ironic name. But I remember this guy, I saw him headline at a show I was on, and he had just 20 minutes. He's been doing comedy, I think, probably since the 70s. And he had just 20 minutes of amazing stories about horrible shows from the past.
Mark Schiff.
His every story was so funny about a time when audiences didn't think he was so funny. And I was like, I thought it'd be funny if I'm like, wow, what if that was you can't start out in comedy like that. You can't go out for your first show and be like, "Hey, so I did a show and it went bad," because you didn't and you couldn't. Like it's funny to imagine this guy just always has been. There's always horrible stories in the past that alchemize into beautiful gems of stories in the present and the future. And so, yes, I look back on those times. I look back on shows I did last night fondly that weren't my, like, oh, wow, 6 people at 6 p.m. Like, fun to talk about now.
Oh, and that book you were talking about, I Killed, True Stories of the Road from America's Top Comics, written by Rich Schneider and Mark Schiff.
Rich Schneider and who else?
Mark Schiff.
Mark Schiff, yes. I actually think it was, I forget which one of them it was. I think it might have been Rich Schneider that story was about. Thank you.
Well, that's a fantastic lesson for up-and-coming comedians to take away with them from this conversation today, I think. Even if you bomb, you can turn it into a fantastic story for later. Mm-hmm. Myq, I want to tell you, I think you're absolutely hilarious. I've been following your career for a long time. I love you as a comedian. I want to go over your dates for the people. I've got them all right here. April 18th, you can see him at Club 337 in Lafayette. That show's for sure going to sell out. That's a fantastic club. April 19th, you can see him at the Howlin' Wolf in New Orleans. April 20th, you can see him at the Merry Widow in Mobile. And April 21st, you can see him at Beaches Comedy Club in Panama City, Florida. That club just opened up, so I'm sure that's going to be a very fantastic, fun night. Our listenership is all the way from Lafayette to Panama City pretty much, so everyone listening to this should have an opportunity to see Myq Kaplan somewhere. Hey, Myq, thanks so much for coming on the show, man.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Hey, my band got banned from the Howlin' Wolf, and we got kicked out. But that's a story for a different day.
Your band got banned. That's like the guy with Die who died.
Jason Mays. Jason Mays.
I'm so sorry.
Myq, it has been an absolute pleasure. Now I'm thinking Mark from the book, and because I want to go read that book.
I get you.
But tell everybody, you have a Linktree. It's Linktree/Myq Kaplan, and that is all your links. Tell them where all they can find on there.
Absolutely. So if you spell Myq Kaplan the weird way that I do it, MyqKaplan, you can put that anywhere you're searching for. I would say the best place, whatever streaming service you get your comedy albums on, your Spotify's and such. I got a bunch of comedy albums. Those places, you can follow me on social media, all the places that have @Myq Kaplan. And I've got a newsletter that comes out once a week for free, and then you can subscribe for more. That's at myqkaplan.substack.com. My live dates are at myqkaplan.com. Anywhere that you think you could find a comedian online, search for Myq Kaplan. You'll find me. And I guess the final thing I'll tell you is I collaborated with a buddy of mine, Ramin Nazer, on a book where he is an incredible visual artist and more, and he illustrated a bunch of my jokes, and that book is called Heartbrain Art Train, available through my website and his. And thank you so much for the opportunity to come on the show and share.
Oh, yeah. And I'll put all those links in the show notes so you can go follow Myq everywhere and go see all the specials and all that good stuff. So thank you again for hanging out with us, man. This has been an excellent talk with you today.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you so much, Jacob. You guys could just vote. I think to close it on the name, we started with names. We'll end with names. You guys are two J's, the old J&J, and it's a nice shot in the arm, like the J&J vaccine. That is, of course, short for Johnson, as opposed to whatever it was that you said earlier that wasn't Johnson, and I forget what it was. But that's the way to do callbacks, everyone, is know that there's something that you can say, but get it wrong.
We are the J&J vaccine, so listen to this show and you will be inoculated against all horrible things that can happen to you in life.
We'll give you blood clots.
Yeah. Jacob, anything else before we walk out the door?
Yeah, man, you guys need to get into that Patreon, patreon.com/OM podcast. You can find wonderful chats like this. Sometimes we'll have a guest on the Patreon episodes. Sometimes we'll do challenge videos. Sometimes we'll watch movies and talk about them. We'll do the headliners episodes with news stories. There's a lot of extra content over there at the Patreon. And you can go to openmicers.com to see our blog posts, to see who's going to be coming on the podcast soon, and all that good stuff.
So if you want to email us at openmicerspodcast@gmail.com. Openmicers.com is our website, or you can go to Linktr.ee/openmicerspodcast, and that takes you everywhere you need to go. All the socials, all the ways to give us money, like not only Patreon, but there's also Cash App, there's PayPal. Say, hey, here's a couple of bucks, guys. Thank you for all the free funny. So we love you guys, and we'll see you all next week. All right, and thank you all for watching on YouTube, and we'll see you next week.